I was that shy.
Everyone has a sock drawer where we hide the stuff we don't want to face. Today, we're opening yours. I'm Lisa Begley, and this is the Sock Drawer Podcast. If your life feels messy, stuck, or outgrown, good. That's where we begin. Hey, Sock Drawer family, welcome back. What if the way you've been trying to create stability in your life is actually the very thing that's keeping you stuck? Because today's guest has spent decades inside industries that never stop changing. And what he's learned about navigating uncertainty applies far beyond business. Welcome back to the Sock Drawer Podcast. This is a place where we open up the parts of life we don't always talk about, the transitions, the identity shifts, and the moments where something no longer fits and we have to decide what comes next. Today's episode is brought to you by Project Icon, helping leaders, founders share their story, build their brand, and find their voice. Now let's get into it. Today's conversation is a powerful one. Lincoln Bleveans has spent over 3 decades at the forefront of energy, sustainability, and global infrastructure. He's led mission-critical operations, advised innovative companies, and worked inside systems that quite literally power the world. But what makes this conversation matter isn't just what he's done. It's what he's learned about navigating change, making decisions when there is no clear path, and understanding what actually matters when everything around you is evolving. Lincoln, welcome to the Sock Drawer Podcast. I am so happy to have you here today.
And I am so honored to be here. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Well, as we talked about a little bit before we started, I just want to jump in. I like to kind of take it back a little bit, right? You've spent your life inside constant change. What has actually, what has that actually taught you personally about how to navigate it?
Well, I think I started with change in a lot of ways.
Okay.
I am kind of the ultimate square peg. I was a foreign language major in college. I went to law school because I thought it would be a good idea and I would like it. Turns out it probably was a good idea, but I didn't like it.
Okay.
I didn't want to be a lawyer. And then I fell into the electricity business without any engineering background, not having taken a math course since high school, and that was a long time ago, before cell phones, if everyone can remember back that far. So falling into it and learning by osmosis in learning in real time as I'm working. So change, that sense of my own knowledge expanding and the work being done and the industries changing underneath my feet, it's really been a major theme for me. And I think I've come to think that maybe because I am a square peg, it's actually easier for me to adapt to change as opposed to someone who's more specialized. But we can certainly dig into that.
Yeah. And I love that. So looking back at being that square peg, take me back to a season in your life where things maybe felt uncertain and unclear? Like, was it the moment where you thought, no, I don't want to be a lawyer? Or did it come before or after that?
It came right about at that point, actually.
Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head. Having invested 3 years of my life in law school, I thought I was going to love it. I love to read, I love to write. And so I thought I was going to love it. Turns out I just don't have that. I didn't have that gene for it in the way that my classmates did. Yeah. And I decided that I would much rather be the client than the service provider. Mm-hmm. So I really was at a loss. It was a very, very difficult point in my life. Call it a quarter life crisis. Right around that age. And the question was, how do I take a lot of generalist skill and ability, but no real focal point, and apply that in a way that was going to result in both purpose and prosperity, doing something that was really meaningful and also doing well at it financially, which was important to me. And so that was a real pivot point. And at the time, it was very much by chance. I was working at a startup. A friend of the family and started reading about what was going on in what we then called emerging market countries with privately financed power generation, power plants.
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions of dollars. It's like monopoly money in that business.
Yeah.
And I realized this is something that is very complex. It's something the world is figuring out as it goes. These having reliable power supply fundamentally improves communities, and improves, all the statistics. Electricity is really an enabling function.
Yeah.
And again, through a friend of a friend, and then having someone in my first job who looked at me and said, this person has never knowingly seen a power plant in their lives,
Yeah.
but they've got enthusiasm and they've got the horsepower, and I feel like they're going to be good at this, and really, really kind of reached down and pulled me up.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, and took a chance on me. And what I found immediately was that I absolutely loved it.
Mm-hmm.
It was horribly complex. I mean, which to me is unfortunately attractive, horribly complex, and very, very high stakes, and
Yeah.
these very long gestation, complex projects, and real impact for the communities, the countries where we were building these plants. And I just started absorbing it: the finance, the accounting, engineering, the operations.
Yeah.
And that was really transformative for me, because it showed me, first of all, I got a job, which was huge at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have to
Having
start
3 years in college of law school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta start making a living.
Yeah.
But really found it transformative in that it was my square pegness actually fit the crazy complexity of and rapid evolution in real time of that business.
Yeah.
And it showed me that I could bring something to the table that the specialists couldn't. I could bring the synthesis to the table. They could do the analysis, and that vitally important. I was the one who could bring that together and create the partnerships and create the teams and run the teams that would get these things done. And that was really a launching point into almost every aspect of the electricity business over the last 30 years.
Interesting.
But again, everything by osmosis. Everything by osmosis.
That's an amazing transition, I feel like, to go from, law school. However, as you were talking, I was putting together some of the skill sets that you get and need as an attorney or a lawyer, and learn into maybe working for a friend, or being, a friend of a friend of a friend who got you into this position. And that, you may have had, unbeknownst to you at the time, maybe that you had those skills that actually were beneficial to what you were doing back then. Does that make sense?
No, it
Meaning,
totally does.
Yeah. So like that whole skill set actually fit. And sometimes I talk about that a lot, is that, a lot of times the skills are transferable, with or without a degree. Skills are transferable in multiple different job settings. So anyway, tell me a little bit more about electricity back then versus what it looks like now. So what did that look like back then when you first started all?
Well, it was very stodgy. It was very
Okay,
stodgy.
so how do you mean?
It was a utility that owns all the infrastructure. They make the electricity, they send you all the electricity, you get everybody gets electricity and a bill. And that was really as complex as the relationship got.
Okay.
Because it was intensely regulated. And what started happening in the late 80s, early 90s, is that the US and the world started experimenting with deregulating that business. So making parts of it competitive, going from monopoly systems to competitive systems for private investment in power plants and transmission lines, such that you're actually competing as opposed to being just part of a monopoly. And the idea was, if we let the market into this monopoly, we will get lower prices and we will get better outcomes. To a large extent, that's been true. It's
I was
also
gonna,
been interesting in the context of this change from fossil fuel to renewables
yeah.
as well, kind of an unintended outcome or unanticipated outcome of all of this. And so what I was doing was at the time, on the far edge of the competition spectrum, where we were literally going out and competing for places to build power plants. We were competing for the resources to do that, and creating these very commercial structures in what used to be, or often sometimes still was, very monopoly environments. And so we were kind of we were revolutionizing from the inside. And what was happening in the macro, what that created was this rush towards deregulation that took an industry that Thomas Edison would recognize. And quick shout out for my podcast on this.
Yeah.
But an industry that and equipment that Thomas Edison would recognize, and turned it into a series of marketplaces where private sector competed, not just these consolidated utilities companies. And so what that's brought is a pace of innovation that's gone from as close to a flat line as you can get, without getting to the flat line, to something that is quite a bit more aggressive than that. You've also ended up with, instead of having that one-way linear relationship with the utility, electricity and a bill, you can have solar on your roof, you can have batteries in your garage, you can contract to get your power from a green provider, for example, or some other competitor for your business. If you like the green profile, if you like the cost profile, et cetera. And it's taken what has been, by design, the world's stodgiest business, the electric utility business, and turn it into one of the most dynamic and complex and rapidly evolving and exciting businesses in the world. And I've had the great opportunity, looking in hindsight, to have ridden that wave. Yeah. Really from the beginning. And that's been super exciting. And it's really, I'm as energized now, terrible pun, sorry. I'm as energized now as I was in the early 90s.
Yeah. That is so cool. And boy, it just opens up a whole dish of questions. Taking me back there, where we are now, we have multiple options for our energy source. Tell me a little bit about, because sustainability is I don't want to just call it a buzzword, because I think it's important. I don't want to minimize it in any way, shape, or form. But tell me a little bit about sustainability now and how we got there. Like, how did we go from nobody even talked about that? When I remember growing up, like you said, right? Energy bill, you paid it. That's what you did, So tell me about that evolution.
Well, I think it starts with, you could say that it starts with the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act that were a Nixon administration bills, absolutely transformational bills. There was a growing understanding in the 70s that what we at that time called pollution, we were very focused on pollution, started growing in the American mind. And we started thinking about, at a very low level, we started thinking about what happens to stuff after we dump it, after we discard it. Does it go in a river or a lake or an ocean? Does it go in a landfill? How do we make our air cleaner, our water cleaner, our soil cleaner? That was building, the first Earth Day was in the 70s, and it just became a bigger and bigger thing. I remember what it was like before recycling, but I also remember when those curbside bins, we started recycling in, late 70s maybe. And all of a sudden, I was in, 10, 11, 12. Yeah. All of a sudden that just became what you did. And, so there is a loop for these, glass bottles, these tin cans, this corrugated paper and newspaper, et cetera. That was the first big breakthrough, was the recycling movement. And in my mind, and as climate change became more apparent, or global warming as we used to call it, climate change became more apparent in storm activity. 500 once in 500 year storm happening every happening every 5 years.
Yeah.
We're seeing that all over the country. We're seeing the frequency, the severity of storms, wildfires, droughts, heat waves. Everybody's starting to feel it, and it took decades, but we have gotten to the point where we understand. The vast majority of people understand that what we do and what we've done as human beings is creating an increasingly unlivable world, or at least more difficult to live in world. And that there are things that we can do about that. I think it really took off, though, when in the early 2000s, when solar and wind power generation, the cost of that took a steep drop. The Chinese government, as a matter of industrial policy, decided that China was going to make solar panels for the world, and they dropped the cost many, many times.
Yeah.
And really made it competitive with fossil-fueled electricity. And wind turbines followed the same path. And all of a sudden, you were seeing these big solar farms, these big wind farms. And people started, and that was on the utility scale, on the residential scale, or the industrial commercial scale. You started seeing solar panels on roofs. You started seeing different energy service providers doing different things, different services for customers that would help them save money, lower risk, increase green content. So it's been a it started out very slowly, and it's been accelerating, but it's literally been, I hate to say this out loud, but the 70s were a long time ago.
Yeah.
Despite what I might think. It's literally taken that long.
Yeah.
For this to really coalesce. And so what I'm finding, especially with my work here at Stanford, is that not only do we have the tools to solve the problem, but we have younger generations, rising generations, who won't take no or even slow for an answer. And so not only is the technology driving it, but the human behavior through the younger generations primarily is starting to drive it as well.
Yeah.
And so it's just part of the new normal at this point.
Yeah. I mean, which is good, right? Like so two things that strike me about this recycling movement that you mentioned, as it sticks in my head, is I remember we moved across country. Now this is the 90s. So essentially 20 some years later, to the time frame you're referring to. And I don't know why this would be, but the West Coast, we migrated from our family from Southern California to Syracuse, New York. Southern California had the word recycling had not even surfaced that I can recall. There wasn't any recycling requirements or options that I remember at that point. We weren't putting away glass here and plastic here and all of that. When we got to Syracuse on the East Coast, it was a thing. It was almost like a law, like you had to recycle. So I think that's an interesting, concept that the West Coast, not that I don't want to label it West Coast, East Coast, but just that there were two different locations geographically that were so different in the mindset of, sustainability and recycling and all of that kind of thing. And now we've been on the East Coast ever since. And it's a thing. And for me, it's not required. We are in North Carolina now, and it's not required, but it's something that I insist upon and I request. We don't have to have a recycling bin, but I do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting that it hasn't become almost mandatory. I mean, why hasn't it become mandatory?
I think, well, first of all, let me react to
Save the planet,
your geographic distinction. I travel a lot, and I'm a waste geek. I'll admit it. I'm a waste geek. That's part of what I run here at Stanford is waste management.
Okay, tell me more.
We're really like a small city here at Stanford, and I've got energy and water and waste utilities and building automation and a few other things. So really the beating, plus the Office of Sustainability, really the beating heart of the institution. So I was new to waste when I got here, and I quickly got really highly educated. Couldn't help it. But one of the things that I do is when I arrive in an airport that I've never been in, I invariably, and this drives my wife nuts, I will take a selfie with the trash cans, because
I love that.
You go from a place like San Francisco International Airport, which is right over there.
Yeah.
And there are 3 bins, very clearly marked, very intentional. And you land in, I'll pick on Columbus, Ohio, because part of my family lives there. You land in Columbus, and it's one, maybe there's a recycling bin, but often just one general purpose.
Big
Everything
bin.
goes in bin.
Interesting.
And then I've over in Europe, this is where it really gets embarrassing. I'll do the same thing. And some places have 3 bins, some have 5. I think the Danish are on, I think there are 12 bins now.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Different, you get a very, so it ends up being, I think there's a political element to it. But there's a really big behavior change element to it. And that takes time.
For sure.
You can't start with 5 bins. You got to start with 2 or 3 maybe. And then it becomes, I think, a generational thing where generations grow up with this and it's just normal. And then we can add a little bit more refinement to it. Yeah. And that's the new normal. And then generations change over again. But it's literally, as human beings, we hate change. It takes us that long.
It does.
To adjust to these new systems. And I'll tell you, I have a lot of Danish friends, and they report, yes, we have like a dozen bins now, but people are pretty grumbly about the dozen bins. We may be hitting a limit.
Yeah.
But it's very much a generational change. And I think we're seeing that with green energy. I think we're seeing that with sustainability in general.
Yeah.
The thing that's happening faster, though, is not the sustainability side, which is the mitigation side, but the resilience side. I think people are seeing once in a lifetime storms happening every few years, and the droughts and the wildfires. That seems preparing for those events, becoming resilient to those events, seems to have an easier time across political lines than the mitigation side, what we think of as the sustainability side. The response side, the resilience and adaptation side, that seems to be you get a wider audience with that discussion. Some of them will stay there. Some of them will say, oh, well, this is really bad. It's really expensive. Let's start mitigating the problem. But I've found, in terms of change management, in terms of communicating around the world about these topics, that it's much easier and more connecting, more empathetic, ultimately, to start with the resilience conversation and then move backwards to the mitigation conversation.
I like that.
It's really meeting people where they are.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the kind of the human behavior and having to evolve into just being able to put something here and put something here and do that. That's interesting to me. Our local grocery store has 3 bins outside, waste, plastic, glass, and even that, like, you have to stop and you have to divide it up, and you have to be willing to do that. Yes. So I think that's interesting. That it's interesting to me how much human behavior does play into just creating this system and this habit of getting into doing that. And if you just told yourself you're saving the planet for your future, kids and grandkids and great grandkids, maybe it would matter more. Well, so Lincoln, you've spent your career inside systems that are constantly evolving, but underneath that, you've been living inside change for a long time. And to that human behavior point, what have decades of constant change taught you about people?
I think, it's taught me, I think, about the world, that change is the constant. It's just things are always changing, whether we notice them or not. And so you have to go with that. You have to go with that change in the evolution of the way we do things and how we look at the world. Yeah. I think and that goes to sustainability and resilience and everything else.
Yeah.
I think what it's taught me about people is that people see, and I think this goes back to very primal impulses, people see change as risk to them. And risk, we are at the very core of our beings, we are self-preserving creatures.
Yeah.
And so that risk, it seems a change that might seem minor is actually triggering really reptilian, way
Yeah.
back there in the brain
Yeah.
sort of anxiety and
Yeah.
fear. And so what I've realized about change is that we have to recognize that in every single thing we do. It may be obvious to us why we need to change. It may seem easy the way we need to change, but we have to meet human beings where they are, not where we'd like them to be. And that means a lot of things. That means a lot of communication, a ton of listening,
Yeah.
and a ton of problem solving, a ton of compromise,
Yeah.
because we're never going to get the purest solutions, never work. Uh, and that, but ultimately, that people will come along. People, if you do it right, if you really think about change management, if you really think about systems thinking, design thinking, you can identify an outcome that you want and then kind of work back from it and get people involved at the beginning, especially your harshest critics, especially the folks who are most anxious about what you want to do.
Yeah.
Bring them around the table, make them part of the solution,
Yeah.
which people will do,
Yeah.
and get that input and buy-in at the very beginning of a change management exercise.
Mm.
The later you bring people into the process and the later you bring your critics into the process,
Mm-hmm.
the lower the chance of success.
Yeah.
So it's really, I call it applied empathy. I think you have to be empathetic and meet people where they are, but then you have to engineer that applied empathy into the systems that you're creating. So that's a little bit theoretical, but I'll give you a quick example.
Sure.
One, to kind of shift gears to sort of a career idea, and something that's really worked for me. When you go back in the American space program, at the very beginning, the Mercury program, which really started everything off, the astronauts were recruited from the fighter pilot or the test pilot ranks, the best pilots, even though it was just going to be a capsule and the person in the capsule would have no control, and there was going to be they had to argue for a window, actually, for a long time. It was not seen as a step up from their very glamorous test pilot lives. It was seen as a step down. Certain people, though, certain of those test pilots said, no, I'm signing up because this is the next step. As crude as it is right now, this is the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And they became an astronaut despite the whole world, riffing on the quote behind you a little bit, despite the whole world saying, no, 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 stay where you are, stay what you are. Don't lean into this new thing.
Yeah.
But they did. And that changed the world. It changed their careers. It changed everything about the way we exist on this planet. And so I would really encourage people, and this has been a pattern in my career, if somebody comes along with a project or a job and you say to yourself, I don't know anything about this. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm going to fail. I'd rather just be in my comfortable my comfortable current job or role. Step up and be an astronaut, because you're going to figure out the substance. You're going to bring the experts around you. But the real pivots in my career have been when I stepped into something as a leader that I knew nothing about. And go negotiate this agreement, go figure out this partnership, go create this new organization. It's those steps into the unknown that have first of all, turned out really well. Second of all, have been the pivots in my career. I guess I absorbed that astronaut example pretty early.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you mentioned early on your adaptability, being a square peg and maybe not fitting into a round hole, but adapting to be able to do that,
Yeah.
This seems similar. And and I love that. I love that you describe it in that way. Go be an astronaut. And can you take me to where, because you're at Stanford and you've been there a long time. So taking your career path along the way, what led you to Stanford? Like, what was it that got you there? and kept you there for so long?
Well, it was about 5.5 years ago, and I
Mm-hmm.
was working in helping run a municipal utility in Burbank, California, Burbank Water and Power, which is part of the city of Burbank. Very,
Yeah.
very innovative, very forward-looking and forward-acting utility, still is. And I thought that that was going to be the rest of my career. I had gotten pretty good at it, and I thought, okay, this is the glide path, right?
Yeah.
And then I got a call from a recruiter, and they said, how would you like to come to Stanford and run energy and water and building energy systems and sustainability for the campus? And I had never been to Stanford. I knew it by reputation. It was deep COVID, so the idea of going to Stanford and meeting people was off the table.
Yeah.
But it had this sense of opportunity and possibility, not just in bringing all these different subject matters together and integrating them, but doing it at a place where you throw a rock, you hit a Nobel Prize winner. I mean, and being on a first name
Yeah.
basis with these people
Yeah.
suddenly, being in the heart of Silicon Valley, where the future is literally being created as we speak.
Yeah.
It checked a lot of boxes in terms of really running a big, wide-ranging, diverse group. But ultimately, it came down to the sense of purpose, the sense of being able to do things at Stanford, and we have, that have really moved the needle for the world, whether it's the day in, day out work that we do running the utilities that power the campus and keep the campus going. And thus, I always tell my people, every Nobel Prize, you had a part of that comes out of Stanford. What you do helped lead to that Nobel Prize. But also the opportunity to innovate in our energy systems, in our water systems, in our waste systems, or in our buildings in terms of how we power and heat and cool and light those buildings. The opportunity to innovate with some of the smartest people on the planet. It just grabbed me. It was, again, a call out of the blue.
Yeah.
I still don't know where this person got my name, but a call out of the blue, and it's turned out to be a really good fit. And
this is
where
a
my
full,
square pegness,
Yep. And I was just going to say, and a full circle moment to what you just said a moment ago about taking the chance, take the leap, go for it. It might feel uncomfortable, but it's typically going to lead you to something great, something beyond when you expand beyond your boundaries. That's exactly what you just explained to us a little bit ago. And I love that. And, throughout your career, you've had to make decisions that impact not just you, but entire systems. How do you make a decision when there isn't really a clear path or a clear right answer? Is it different all the time, or is it something like you stick with the same type of process?
Well, I guess I have a couple of rules of thumb or ways of thinking about this.
Yeah.
I think the first way I think about it is the decision I'm making durable? In other words, we're going to spend money on something, or we're going to do something a certain way. Is it going to check the box economically? Is it going to check the box in terms of sustainability and climate? And is it going to check the box in terms of user experience? That's what makes, in my world, that's what makes a sustainable sustainability, a durable, that's a durable answer, because it's a triple bottom line. So that's one question. I think doing things just for sustainability's sake, they may be great things to do, but unless they're also economically and operationally durable, they're probably not going to last. They're probably not going to have the impact that you want. I think the other thing, though, that I'm constantly thinking about, and maybe it's, staring down 60 at this point, is that I always wonder what my grandkids are going to think. So many of the systems that I work in, we measure time in decades. Water systems, energy systems, big infrastructure, that last 30, 40, 50, 100 years. What am I just making today's status quo happy? Or am I doing my best to position the university to be still in the right, on the right side of history, half a century from now? Because these systems last that long, and they're paid off over very extended periods of time.
Yeah.
Thinking about energy investments, for example, thinking about them, not only are they going to age well? Are they going to age well in terms of the constantly shifting definitions of what's sustainable and what's polluting, what's not polluting? But also, are they equipped for circularity? Can a solar panel be recycled? Can a wind turbine blade be recycled? Can a big battery, for example, can the rare earth minerals in that battery be recycled and reused? What's the pollution footprint at the very beginning of a product? What's the pollution footprint at the very end of a product? Starting to think in a much more circular way and feeling a personal responsibility to set things up so that my grandchildren will look back at me and say, oh yeah, no, they were thinking through this.
Yeah.
They left us with the best they could leave us with.
Leaving a legacy. So important. Lincoln, when you think back, have you ever made a decision that looked right, but it didn't feel right?
I've had a couple of those. And of course, I'm blanking on examples. You often get to a point, or you sometimes get to a point where the financial model tells you one thing and your gut tells you another thing.
Sure.
It really comes down to, first of all, a confidence that the financial model, for example, actually reflects everything that you're worried about and every opportunity and every benefit, every cost. But also really challenging your gut. I've been in situations where I had to stop projects, abandon projects over very loud, very senior objections because I knew that the reality of the project, or that the surface, what was visible of the project was not the reality of the project.
I see.
That it had a very shiny surface and it was just not going to go well when it confronted reality. I've had to do that in the context of working in countries where the bribery laws are different from the ones that we have in the US. And even as a very young professional, saying to the CEO, this seems like a great opportunity, but it's the wrong thing to do, and here's why. And I've always found that, not always, I've almost always found that my gut is onto something. Maybe it can be mitigated. Maybe I'm thinking about it wrong, and I'm always open to, conversation and discussion about these things. I love a dissenting opinion, but how do you, really feeling enough confidence in yourself to maybe not trust your gut as a decision maker, but trust your gut as a big red arrow pointing in a certain direction. And you need to follow that arrow and see where it leads.
Yeah.
They're really pivotal moments in a career when you
for sure
have those.
Career and many other processes through life, right? Many other parts of life that we journey through. A lot of our listeners are in a season of life where everything's kind of messy, or maybe something just feels off, but they can't really name it. They know something needs to shift. And you've done this multiple times in your life and career. What would you say to the person? Maybe what's one small step they could take this week that could help them sort of discern that and move forward?
To me, it's about figuring out what scares you, first and foremost.
Okay.
And often you need someone to help you through this analysis, someone to play devil's advocate, somebody to illuminate what may be very vague feelings and
true.
Specify that. Early in my career, I was the shyest kid in the world. I literally could not call up a store to ask how late they were open. I was that shy as a kid. And this is before.
It's hard to imagine, Lincoln.
And just intensely shy. But I realized very early on that if I wanted to be the success and have the impact that I wanted to have, I would need to learn public speaking, which of course is a shy person doesn't have a greater fear in the entire world than public speaking.
The holy grail of fear.
Yeah. And I threw myself into it. And honestly, the first couple of times, I don't remember anything. I remember walking up. I remember walking back. I don't.
So scared. Yeah.
But I kept throwing myself into the lion's den and started getting more comfortable with it, started getting a little bit better at it. And now, 30 years on, I realize that's actually it is maybe the most favorite thing that I do in my job and
Yeah.
outside of my job is public speaking. But it really took a very, very hard conversation with myself and with others to realize, hey, you're terrified of this. And it is the roadblock to getting things, accomplishing what you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
So maybe you just go to a public speaking class. Maybe you don't do the kind of deep end, shark infested deep end that I did. But what's the first
Yeah.
step?
What's the first step? Yeah.
And
It's always deciding to do it. You have to put your mind to it, I think, So yeah, I think that's important. And so tell us a little bit about your podcast, where we can find it, what's the name of it, tell me what you talk about on it, share it with us.
oh, sure. So I have one podcast that's been running for a couple of years. It's called Climate Plus: Purpose and Prosperity in an Unprecedented World.
Mm.
And you can find that literally everywhere. It's kind of a Mondrian graphic is the logo. And that's an interview-driven podcast with people working literally around the world. Just in
On
an
climate
episode.
change and sustainability and things like energy, or tell us
Yeah,
more.
really everything. I call it the Climate Plus world. It's climate change, it's pollution, it's endemic, it's political divisions, human migration, it's species loss. It's really how do we adapt? How do we both find purpose and prosperity in a world that is changing in very rapid and very unprecedented ways? So I end up with a pretty large scope. I mean, I had somebody on about circular fashion last week. Before that, it was sustainability planning in Nigeria.
Wow.
Before that, it was on AI and how AI can help us and what we need to look out for. So it's very, very wide-ranging, interview-driven. The other one is called Edison Squints, and that's on YouTube. It's just Edison Squints on YouTube. And that's an image that I have of, if Thomas Edison came back to life and looked around at the electricity system, he would probably recognize almost everything in the electricity system. He'd be impressed, but he'd probably recognize it.
Yeah.
My thesis is that 10 years from now, Edison can squint all he wants. He won't recognize the system anymore. There's that much change, more change in the next decade than there has been in the last century. And so I'm exploring a bunch of different angles on that theme in Edison Squints. And those I call them flash keynotes. They're about 8-9 minutes long and try to get people thinking, in different ways.
And speaking, where do you speak next? And what do you normally, is it all climate change, sustainability, things like that? What is your go-to subject when you're speaking?
Well, I'm speaking all over the world, which I'm really.
I saw that. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Some is, a lot in the US, but literally everywhere in the world at this point. And I talk about, I guess, two general themes. One is a lot of what we talked about today, which is how do you position yourself as a unique human being for purpose and prosperity going forward in this crazy world. But the other is much more substantive, and it's much more about energy and water and sustainability and resilience and pollution and circular economy and technology innovation around all of those things. So it's much more of my subject matter expertise as opposed to my life, accumulated life knowledge.
Introspection.
So, introspection. Yeah.
I love that. So leaving our listeners, before we jump into what we call a 60-second drawer dash, which is like kind of a rapid fire questions I'm going to throw at you. What would you'd like to leave our listeners with today, Lincoln? Is there anything specific you want to make sure, recommend, suggest? What would you like to leave them with?
I always go back to a quote from Mark Twain. It is, and I in the moment, I can't remember it verbatim, but it's basically about cast off your bow lines. So, untether your boat from the dock and sail out into the world. And when in doubt, cast off your bow lines. When in doubt, lean into that uncertainty. Lean into that opportunity that you maybe don't think you can do. Always walk through the door when it opens. Always choose to be the astronaut.
I love that.
When you see those opportunities, choose to be the astronaut. And
I love
maybe
that.
Maybe
That's the
that.
quote. That is the quote for this episode for sure. Cause I love that. And I think that speaks to a lot of our listeners who, are struggling or undecided or just can't take the leap, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I love that. I'm going to adopt that. Be the astronaut. So good. Okay, here's what we do, right? So we're just going to shift gears for a little bit. I'm just going to throw some quick questions at you, mostly geared towards you so you can share, what you think. And if it doesn't have to be that quick, if you have a story to share with it, please let us know. Okay. Ocean waves or power grid?
Power grid.
Surfing or strategy meetings?
Strategy meetings and then surfing.
And they're both in there. One moment in your career that completely changed how you think. There are probably multiple, but
there are. But I'll just a very quick story.
Yes.
I was doing power plant project work in India back in the late 90s, and we had a project going in West Bengal, which is right up against Bangladesh, and that's where Kolkata is. And we were staying in the city, and I will never forget driving back from an office or something, but we had to cross Calcutta at rush hour. And the light, it's about half light, and the poverty surrounding, enveloping, engulfing the vehicle was something, despite having been all over the world and thought I'd seen and experienced poverty in that way as I thought I'd seen it. It was at a level that reset my brain as an upper middle class white American male. It reset my brain in terms of a sense of just pure blinding luck, but also in a sense of obligation, personal gut, like core obligation to make the world better, not just make money, but make the world better.
Be a humanitarian.
And that couple of hours, actually, it was a lot of traffic in Calcutta. Really, I got out of that taxi cab a different person than I got in.
Can only imagine. Thank you for sharing that story. Now, what's a belief that you held early on in your career that you have since let go of?
I have let go of any idea at all of the idea of careers as linear. And this is just my circumstances. But to me, careers are a portfolio. You never lose the skills and knowledge and experience along the way. They all combine into a more and more valuable, more and more unique you. I use the skills that I learned as a grocery checkout person in college. I still use those today. I still use the skills that I developed mowing lawns and shoveling snow in Chicago in the 70s when I was a kid. Everything that I've learned is cumulative. Experience, knowledge is cumulative. And it just makes you more valuable, more unique, more effective over time. And so if you're doing something that you're thinking, oh my God, I can't wait to get out of this job, that will circle back. That knowledge and skill will circle back to your benefit at some point, no matter how much, and I've done this, no matter how much you are unhappy in the moment, but also thinking of yourself as that accumulation of riches. Go back and read your resume and realize how cool you are. Oh my goodness, I've done really cool stuff. Yeah. And see yourself as that portfolio, as that unique accumulation of riches that the world needs to benefit from.
I love that. And this is kind of my final fun out of the box question. If you weren't doing any of this now, what do you think you'd be doing instead?
I honestly have no idea. I play the game once in a while with myself. If you won the lottery, what would you do?
Yeah.
And the truth is, I probably wouldn't be a full-time employee anymore, but I would still be active in mentoring startups. I would still be active as a public speaker. I would still be active as a writer and communicator.
Every week we come here and open the drawer. You already know what's inside. You always have. And if this conversation challenged you in a good way, and you think it will help challenge someone else who needs it, send it to them, because that's how we pay it forward together. Subscribe and follow so you never miss what's coming next. And find us at thesockdrawerpodcast.com.